think commuter rail it's sort of is very ingrained in the role that it played in the transportation landscape. And now we're like kind of breaking out of that because of the need to evolve. I do think that our ongoing success really does require a more collective, innovative thought process as to how we continue to evolve and market our businesses.
This is Transit Unplugged. I'm Paul Comfort. Good to be with you on another edition of the world's leading transit executive podcast, Transit Unplugged In-Depth, this week with Michelle Bouchard, Acting Executive Director of Caltrain in California, the 7th largest commuter train system in America. Michelle, thanks so much for being a guest today on the program.
Well, hello. I'm so happy to do it, Paul, and it's really great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. We were just talking in the green room. We've both been in the business a while. We've probably met, but we really haven't had a long conversation. So this will be our first, and you, our listeners, get a chance to listen in.
All right.
So you're in your office today, but headed to InnoTran, I heard, and I'm headed to Florida. So where is your office? Tell us a little about your operation and the scope and size of it.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So thanks for the shameless plug. 7th largest commuter rail in the nation. I feel like every time we talk about who we are, we have to say pre-pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm dying to not have to say that, but pre-pandemic. But anyway, so Caltrain is the railroad that runs along the spine of the Bay Area Peninsula. So it's really cool. Starts in the north in San Francisco, and just runs through Silicon Valley to San Jose, and then we do head further south to Garlic Country. And in Gilroy. So, really dynamic and dense operating environment. So, I know a lot of folks who have said, man, for 51 miles of a single line where you're just going back and forth, you guys are incredibly complex. And we are, and I think that's a reflection of the diverse population that we serve and the diverse communities that we serve. So we're really trying to put a lot of different product out there, so to speak. So, our hallmark product is the Baby Bullet service that we launched, and it's hard to believe because it feels like yesterday. We launched it in 2004, and essentially it was a train that just wasn't stopping very often.
Okay.
We keep it a secret. It's not going super fast, but it's just
a Baby Bullet. That was your baby, right? I heard that that was your brainchild.
I have to tell you something. So with myself, but I had a mentor named Bob Doty, who unfortunately just recently passed. And I was just like a lowly planner, and we were fortunate enough to have him come work with us. And he's like, let's do something.
Yeah.
And so we spent a bunch of time just going back and forth. And frankly, I've learned from him mostly everything I know about operations. And I'd like to think that he learned a little something from me about customer experience and planning. So it was pretty much the two of us. And then it was like a switch had flipped because we were right in the middle of the .com bust, and we were atrophying ridership. So just to give you a sense of where we're at about 25,000 average weekday riders. And then that was 2003 just before. And then from 2004 to now, we've grown to about a 70,000 rider a day service. Again, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And we operate 5 trains per hour in the peak. The thing that's really interesting about us and unique, and that is a blessing, both a blessing and a curse. Let me just say that. We have just, for folks in commuter rail, you're usually serving one central business district. And so you're pumping riders downtown in the morning, and then you got empty seats coming out. That's not the case with us because Silicon Valley is dispersed up and down the peninsula. So we're carrying just as many people into San Francisco as are coming out, going to places like Palo Alto, where Stanford is, Menlo Park, Mountain View, San Jose. So it allows us to be just super efficient in terms of our seat turnover. So, just really, it's a fun environment because, Caltrain has been in the community since, I think we like to say since the time of Lincoln. which I know on the East Coast doesn't seem like it's very old, but on the West Coast it is. We've been continuously operating. And so as a result, the communities have grown up around the train, and Caltrain it's just so well supported by the communities. And so it's just really a pleasure to have gone from being a planner way back when to now, being sort of at the head of this organization that just has so many dedicated people. It's been a fun ride.
That's great. I got so many questions I want to ask you. Just that soliloquy brought all kinds of questions to my mind.
Paul,
No, that's good.
Pause.
Let me ask you this. So we're recording this in the middle of September, and the administration just announced a resolution to a potential rail strike, which I think a lot of people were happy that it got resolved. As you know, I used to run the MARC train down into Washington, D.C., the commuter train service there. And we contracted that out to Amtrak and Bombardier at the time. Do you contract out work, or do you run it with your own employees?
Oh, no, we absolutely do. We have a full turnkey contract to a company called Transit America Services.
Okay.
And we've always contracted it. And Paul, it used to be Amtrak from like 1992. And then we did a competitive procurement that I had the pleasure of leading in sort of the 2009 to 2011 timeframe. And that's when we brought Tassie in. But yeah, we have always contracted out, but we still have the same national labor unions.
Yes. So would that have affected you?
Yeah. So here's the deal. What we have is we have project labor agreements here, or rather Tassie does. And so the answer is not really, except for the fact that we do operate on Union Pacific tracks south of San Jose.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah. So a lot of it's interesting. People don't understand the rail industry, I think, writ large in America. Would you mind like sharing some about the whole industry and how it operates? Because I think it's, let me just set it up. I'll give a little context and you can think about what you want to say. So in America, we have multiple kinds of transportation. We have, downtown city bus. We have light rail systems. We have subway systems. But then we have this whole world of commuter bus and commuter train. So as Michelle and I have been talking about, we both she does currently operate. I used to operate commuter train service. It basically is from the suburbs into the cities in most locations. And her location is a little different because she's got a dense area the whole way. But systems like BART or Long Island Railroad or Metro Trains North, they'll come from the suburbs and bring people into what I call the big, tall buildings downtown. Some systems also operate commuter bus service, which is what I used to do. I had 350 motor coaches under contract with 7 different companies, and we would bring people in from Annapolis, from Western Maryland, all into Baltimore and DC. And those ridership bases have been decimated during the pandemic because most of the people that aren't riding, were white collar commuters going into the downtown areas, and so ridership in those services dropped off 90 to 95%. And in many places, it's not back up over 40%, as many cities are turning into Tuesday through Thursday cities. And the weekends are dying off for commuters. All right, so there's the context. And these trains are run all over the country into urban areas. But a lot of times people don't understand that they run on tracks that they do not own. They run on freight rail tracks, like, Chicago is the center of all this. So that's the context. Now tell us about the industry and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll share my opinions. I'm always happy to share my opinions. I mean, so that's the thing. I mean, when we just talked about the question before, how were we going to be affected by a strike? The great thing about Caltrain is some really smart people in like 1989, when the Southern Pacific and then Union Pacific was having a bit of a fire sale, bought the right of way. And, how smart was that at that time? Because we're one of the few railroads that has the blessing of being able to operate on its own right of way. And
it's amazing.
And it is. And so as a result, we've been fairly lucky to not have to deal with having to force your way onto, a Union Pacific right of way if you're running with an Amtrak train. I mean, I used to work for the Capitol Corridor across the bay. Good friends of mine. They're an inner city service, so they're state funded, but they're on all UP owned territory.
Yeah. Now explain what that means. So, these are freight railroads that are hauling freight, and if they own it and you're just leasing it from them, you get a time slot, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only time you can run. So you can't change your schedule willy-nilly. It's a long process.
It's a long process, and you're usually subject to what's called a trackage rights agreement. So it's not only how you operate, it's how you're going to contribute to maybe some capital improvements.
Yep.
And so, and to varying degrees, there are good relationships between the freight railroads and the commuter or intercity operators. I think it all depends on, to me, it all comes down to what I think transit is all about anyways, which is like, it's all about the relationships, and it's all about the people and their willingness to share in a common desire to bring the people to where they need to be.
Yes.
And so, in the past, I've had some great relationships with some folks at the Union Pacific. We have a trackage rights agreement that's really old,
Right.
and in fact, it's a little bit reciprocal, right? So, just a little bit more about us. We actually host Union Pacific on our right of way.
Okay.
So there's a trackage rights that governs their slots, and then south of San Jose, we have a trackage rights agreement that governs our slots. But
okay.
But you're right. I mean, it's not like you can just really have the latitude to do what you want to do in terms of providing reverse commute service or whatever. We can do that on our right of, which is great. But to the Paul, to the depressing setup that you gave, it's true. I mean, we went from pulling 75% of our operating costs out of the fare box, which
that's great,
right? I mean,
Yeah.
And just to describe what that is, I mean, if you're doing great, typically for rail, you're pulling 40 to 50.
That's right. Yeah, we were doing like 40 to 50% at Mark, I think, at the time. Yeah.
Yep. But
you're at 75. Wow.
Oh, yeah. But so, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Right.
So as soon as we lost all of our commuters, I mean, we at this point are really down, I want to say in the 25 to 30%.
And how are you covering that? How are you financed there generally?
Yeah. So do you guys have joint powers authorities in the East Coast? So we have a membership, if you will. So for our operating and maintenance costs, largely, we are a joint powers authority that is comprised of San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. That's north to south counties. And actually, those are the smart people that got together in 1989 or whatever, and they got together. The county of San Mateo bought the right of way, but then the two partners, I think, just recently have finished paying that off. But short story is 75% operations out of the fare box, and then the remainder was covered with member contributions.
Okay.
And so my budget's around $180 million. There's in the past, there are about $40 million from members. There's some advertising, there's other ancillary revenues, not huge, but that was enough to cover then what was like, I think we got $125 million out of the fare box.
Okay.
Fast forward to COVID.
Yeah.
We're only pulling, whatever, 25% out. A couple of things happened during COVID that were frankly responsible for, I don't even want to know where we'd be if these two things hadn't happened. Primarily, we were the fortunate recipient of federal funds.
Yep.
Those emergency funds have been critical.
CARES Act, ARPA, all that.
All that. And then, but the second one, and this is something that Caltrain's been talking about needing for forever. We managed to get a ballot on the 2020 in the 2020 election that was successful, and so we now have a dedicated funding source that I think was an 8-cent sales tax. So it's going to bring to the railroad about $100 million a year. And when you talk about the public support for Caltrain, you need to get 66, 2/3
Okay.
of the voters. And more than 2/3 of the voters said, yeah, we think Caltrain is so much worth it. We're going to invest money in it.
So
So
how much was it? It was an extra eighth of a cent
eighth of a cent. We think
on the
it's,
sales tax.
yep.
And
We
when does
think
that kick in? Is it already kicked in? You're getting money
it's
from it?
already kicked in. Yep.
Okay.
I mean, we balanced our budget this year with $110 million from that measure.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Wow. What a blessing.
Oh my God. Yeah. No kidding. No kidding.
Just in time and in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, that'll tell you how much support you must have there.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, I think it was recognized that it needed to happen, or else
Yeah.
this was going to be a condition.
Right. Yeah. It could be catastrophic. So how are you governed? Do you have like a board of directors from all those different jurisdictions or something?
Yeah, we do. We've got 3 members from each of the counties.
Okay.
It's really interesting because each of those counties also have their own connecting transit agencies, right? Up in San Francisco, they've got like rail and bus, and
Yeah.
San
26 different agencies serving San Francisco.
It's an interesting conversation amongst them. But yeah, and that's the thing. Just not to dwell on the COVID thing, but we as a region with so many diverse, 27 agencies, a lot of times we're all fighting for the same dollar, right?
Okay.
But what COVID has done is it's brought about like an unprecedented amount of, I think, communication as well as collaboration around things that are really important to riders in general. I think we're starting to think much more collectively about how we deliver service to the region. And I don't think that conversation was happening quite in the way that it's happening now certainly amongst the large operators.
Yeah.
And so I see some bright side there, as we see ourselves, our ridership is recovering. Again,
tell us about that, because the Bay Area has had one of the slowest return to office rates of any metropolitan area in the country, because a lot of these IT companies are letting people work from home. What's it looking like now? How are you managing that?
Well, what we can manage up, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, and it's true. When I look at the graphs, Caltrain is, I think, the slowest to recover of all commuter rails, because
really,
yeah, absolutely. Wow. And I think, we have a really robust relationship and following with many of the big companies along the peninsula. And so we definitely understand that where we got to hook our wagon to their stars, so to speak. But, you got to follow stuff in San Francisco on a daily basis. I think that's going to be the bellwether once we start seeing those office occupancies go up. But it's not there now.
Now, are you seeing what I'm hearing here in the East Coast, which is, cities like New York and Boston and others are Tuesday through Thursday downtown cities?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the funny thing is, right? So we've had to sort of recast our, you point out, 75% of our riders were traveling between, call it 6 and 9 in the morning, and then 4 and 7 at night. And then it's like, okay, everything in between is sort of a throwaway. What we tried to do was figure out, okay, well, and we did what a lot of commuter rails did. Okay, amped up midday service, amped up evening service, amped up weekend service, and said, hey, you know what? We're going to serve the people. We're going to figure out how we're not so concentrated on one market, and we're going to figure out how we're providing much more equitable service. So what we're finding is weekends, we're back to like 80% of pre-pandemic.
Okay.
Our midday is booming.
Okay. That's what everybody's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, and here's
what about nights,
theory.
Evenings? Are you getting more evening work for like stuff happening downtown?
Absolutely. Well, what's great is we got the Giants.
Right.
And we got the Warriors, and they're all right by the train. And you know what? Those fans are diehards. And so special event service is totally booming. And so it's kind of like people work from home, and then they're using transit to go out and do the fun stuff.
Right.
It's a bit on its head, but also, you know what? I got to tell you, as a it's not only challenging as a transit agency, and I don't know, as you're talking to CEOs, we're thinking about, with the Great Resignation, we ourselves have to think about what employment policies or work from home policies might be appropriate to be able to retain and attract talent. So, like, I've heard on the East Coast, it's like, nope, you're in here 5 days a week. That's it. That does not fly out here. It does not. And
California breezes, huh?
there you go. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge. It will continue to be so. And that's where I think, one of the really fun challenges to think about and to have staff think about is, okay, it used to be, well, we're going to be back to normal after the pandemic. And I think the last year we've been thinking about, okay, well, how do we need to recast ourselves in order to better serve our publics? And in order to do that, we've got to really go out and survey and really understand what the revised needs are.
That's right.
So form needs to follow function. It's not anymore, if we just pump a bunch of commute service, we're going to fill up trains, because we're not.
Yeah. It's like Lauren Skyver says, she told me for years, Paul, if they ain't buying it, we shouldn't be selling it. And so, I always use that quote. It's a great one. And
Awesome.
the nomenclature might need to change. Some people are saying they're going to stop calling themselves commuter rail and call themselves regional rail, because it's not really about commuters as much anymore.
Man, I love it. I mean, and honestly, not that we ever projected it would happen this way. And I would like to put in some shameless plugs for our electrification program.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Because one of the things that electrifying our line allows us to do, and what we're really geared towards, is becoming that legitimate regional rail, like providing a transit type service in the regional construct. So the idea is being able to provide, the enhancement that electrification gives us is just performance enhancement. And so what we can do is we can just pump a much higher frequency, really start to align around, I want to say, more of a European style service delivery model.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yep.
So to that end, that's why we had a decision we had to make, whether we were going to go with diesel haul. Going from diesel haul locomotives to electric haul locomotives, or are you going to go all the way and get these electric multiple units with the distributed power?
Oh yeah.
All for the performance. And that's the direction we went. And
the latter one?
Yeah, it's
like Stadler?
Stadler.
Yeah.
Beautiful crash energy management, and just really state of the industry in Europe. And it's kind of cool. I didn't grow up in the rail industry, so I don't get super excited about trains. I get excited about these trains. They're like,
they're awesome. I've seen them, man. They're awesome. I'm very impressed with them.
Oh my God. No, absolutely. We did some testing out at the testing facility in Pueblo, Colorado. And so I was up in the head end with the engineer, and man, he took it up to 110, and it just felt like you were skating on glass. It was awesome. You couldn't feel the speed. You couldn't feel anything. It was amazing.
It's like those Serta mattress commercials where you can set the glass of red wine on the mattress when you're,
totally.
when you're going 110 miles per hour and the rails don't throw it off. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you. So I think and actually having the trains here is really helping to build excitement around our program. And,
where are you at on that, on the acquisition?
Oh yeah, sure. So we have a revenue date of September 2024. Okay. And I'm saying this on Paul's podcast. We are making that date.
Make it happen.
We are making it. It's really exciting because this is one of these projects that it takes a long time, and the beginning years are not, you're like, oh, are they really moving along? Are they really doing that? And then
remember that. Yeah.
Right. And then towards the end, what we've got is now we've got a we've got one of our segments of about 7 miles that is completely, all of the OCS is up. So the overhead catenary, the power system is up. Just last month, we actually have our local electric company, PG&E, is delivering power now to our traction power station. And that's one of, I think it's something like 11 facilities along the peninsula. But that's such a key milestone. But what really matters to the customer experience are the vehicles. And right now we've got 4 of those train sets on property. We're going to get a total of 19 train sets, and they'll be coming in increments through pretty much, I think it's like, call it summer of 2024. But, we're going to be starting integrated testing. And so folks in the southern end of our line are going to get to see those trains going back and forth as they get commissioned. I think there'll probably be some pictures on social media is what I'm thinking.
You think? Yeah.
Thinking.
That's great. Hey, you mentioned that you hadn't spent your, in our remaining minutes, I want to get into your personal story a little bit. You mentioned that you hadn't spent your whole time in rail. Tell us a little about your background, Michelle.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm originally from the East Coast. I actually started, and by education and training, I'm a land use planner. So planning was sort of my entree into transportation. My dad was an airline pilot, so in hindsight, I think I always had the moving people thing.
Yeah, you got it honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So I actually just moved to San Francisco from New York, just because I felt like it at some point. All my people are still on the East Coast, but anyways, I got here and I started working in an investment bank, and there I met one of the investment bankers who's like, hey, my wife works for this planning firm and they're looking for interns. And so that's how I got into transit planning.
That's the way it is. It's the old story. You just meet somebody,
Yeah, no. And my mother was like, I sent you to college. And so anyways, but it turns out it worked out okay. So I just gradually, I caught the rail bug working over at the Capitol Corridor that I mentioned in the East Bay.
Yep.
And then I just, I saw Samtrans was looking for planners. So I walked in the door here in May of 2000. And
22 years later, here you are running the
place.
I
know. It's insane. Anyways, yeah, I don't want to talk too much about that, but it's a little nutty because it's I never said, oh, I want to be an executive director, or I want to do this in particular. I've had the benefit of having some really important mentors in my life who have really challenged me to think a little differently. I had the pleasure of going to work over at BART for a couple of years, working on some non-traditional BART technology. So there's this, it's a DMU extension called eBART, and then there was the Oakland Airport connector. But I like to say Caltrain is like the mafia. You try to leave and they just keep pulling you back in.
That's great, man.
Keep pulling you back in. So, but it's been a great ride. And honestly, we, as I see what we're doing in terms of electrification, as I see what's happening in terms of our ability to really bring on some excellent staff, and then most recently, we've had certain governance changes that I've had the great pleasure of being the first sort of, even though acting, but the first executive director that reports directly to the JPB board. Traditionally, the general manager for San Mateo County, which is one of the member agencies, has also been the executive for the railroad. Anyways, it's just such a great time of transformation. And so on one hand, it's like COVID happened, and so but maybe that's the way it's supposed to go, you know? Maybe it allows us a little more latitude to like do this transformation in ways that are not as constrained as they would normally would be.
I actually, I was just thinking about that this week. I agree with you. I've got this book coming out on equity and inclusion in public transportation, and I go into the whole. I've talked to 20 of the country's top leaders in transit about the topic, and it feels like this was an inflection point. And even though, it's the old axiom, right? Inside every crisis is an opportunity. So
Yep.
this was a crisis, an existential crisis to our industry, but it allowed us a chance to reflect on what is it we're really about? What are we really doing here? And I think we're coming out of it better, don't you?
I absolutely do. I mean, I am like an eternal optimist. But what I referenced, I see the collaboration amongst transit agencies. And I will say in the Bay Area, I'll say one of the things that I've loved about being in transit though is a willingness at every single level for people to share their experiences. So when we talk about coming out of it better, I feel like we're all collectively sharing our experiences. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what's working? What isn't?
Right.
Um, and and I love what you said about, if no one's buying, why are we selling?
Right. Yeah.
And I think what's happened is, and I won't speak for other commuter rail, but I mean, I think commuter rail it's sort of is very ingrained in the role that it played in the transportation landscape. And now we're like kind of breaking out of that because of the need to evolve. So I agree with you. I just couldn't agree more. But I do think that our ongoing success really does require a more collective, innovative thought process as to how we continue to evolve and market our businesses.
That's great. Michelle, I really appreciate this kind of a deep dive into the industry and education. I'm going to market this program as, if you want to know about commuter rail, you should listen to this week's episode, because we really dug in deep, didn't we?
We did. You allowed me to go down some rabbit holes. It's late in the week.
Yeah.
I got a lot of words to say.
Yeah, no, it's great. I really appreciate you doing that. I mean, these are topics that we really haven't explored and plumbed the depths of as we did today. So I thank you so much for being our guest on the show, and would love to have you at some point on a live event. I do live CEO roundtables around the country at conferences, and I think it'd be great to have you represent, one of the representatives of the commuter rail industry, because you really know it, you understand it from the bottom up. You've worked all these different roles. Not everyone has done that, and so I value that personally, and I love rail. For me personally, I mean, the heavy trains, man, that's some of my favorite things about the business.
I am telling you, me too. And Paul, I do have to tell you, it's been really great chatting with you today. And you just call anytime. I'm happy to talk about this thing that I'm so passionate about. But one plug for whoever's listening, September 2024, you will be riding the most gorgeous Swiss trains out here on the peninsula. And so it's my personal invitation to all of you.
I'll be there.
All right, cool.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transit Unplugged In-Depth with our guest, Michelle Bouchard, Acting Executive Director of Caltrain. Next week on Transit Unplugged News and Views, Paul will be chatting with Lisa Walton, CTO of San Francisco MTA. Don't forget to visit transitunplugged.com to sign up for the newsletter so you're always in the loop with everything that's going on with the show. And if you have a question, comment, or would like to be a guest on the show, feel free to email us anytime at info@transitunplugged.com. So until next week, ride safe and ride happy.